Hi, welcome back to the Gear4music Synth and Tech channel. My name's Jordan, and today I'm joined by Jack Dury from Shure. Today we're going to talk about all things wireless, but before we do that, please make sure you hit that subscribe button. So Jack, talk us through wireless systems, how they work, and what components do we need to create one?
Okay, components of a wireless system. There's only really two that we need to worry about. We have a transmitter. So this will have some kind of microphone on it, like this handheld here, or a body pack that we'd plug a microphone into or a guitar into. And the purpose of this is to take that audio and process it in such a way that I can then send it over the air. That's a process called modulation, right? So we're modulating that audio in such a way that I can get that sent over the air to my receiver. This will be at the rack or at the amplifier or something like that. And this device's purpose is to listen out for that signal that we then create, which is going to be fairly useless, and then demodulate it and turn it back into some sort of usable audio for me to send to my mixing console or my audio interface.
So I know wireless systems use frequency a lot, but how do they talk to each other? So how does the transmitter talk to the receiver, and how does that usually work?
Great question. There's two ways of doing this. There's the analog way, which is how systems always used to work. And now increasingly manufacturers are using digital modulation in order to make that work. So most of the Shure portfolio now, apart from BLX, is digital. Yeah. But to understand it, we kind of have to look at analog first. So got an old analog transmitter here. This is a UR1M. We don't make this anymore. And this is the UHF spectrum behind me. This is basically the space that we use to kind of put anything that we want to send wirelessly that we don't want to perceive as humans. So, you know, if we could perceive this spectrum, you'd hear like the taxi cabs and the baby monitors and all the kind of Wi-Fi stuff. We can't perceive it, which is why we aren't driven mad by it. Yeah. And it's really useful for us to send wireless information in our everyday lives, mobile phones, that sort of thing. The squiggly line at the bottom here is the noise floor. So this is going to be made up of like the lights and the TV and the computer, just devices generating some useless RF energy. It's all fairly low level. And the purpose of any wireless system is to generate a frequency that punches up above that noise floor, which is what I've done here. And I've got a microphone plugged into this. So we can see when it's at rest, when there's no audio going through it, that carrier is kind of, stays still. There's not a lot going on. And as soon as I speak into it, 1, 2, 1, 2, we start to modulate it. And what we're doing is that center frequency, which in this case is 610, we're moving it about left and right really, really quickly to literally paint a picture of the audio waveform over the air. So this waterfall plot down here shows that process happening. If I was to take that and flip it that way, you'd kind of see it as something that we're very used to seeing in Logic Pro Tools or Logic or GarageBand. Absolutely. So this system works really, really well. The modulation is quite, harsh. We are doing a lot of compressing and things to get this audio working. So analog systems do have an audio impact in terms of if you put it wirelessly, it's going to sound different to if it was a cable. The other problem that analog systems have is when we start to introduce other transmitters. So I've got a second transmitter here, and there we go. We can see it popping up over this way. And this is all well and good, but imagine that this is a band, and perhaps this is a guitarist and a bass player, and the guitarist is about to come and do a solo, and the bass player are going to have a little kind of bromance moment. And we can see when they physically come close together, we get this weird sort of interference start to occur across the whole audio spectrum.
And then that would come through in the live setting, right? Like through the PA, like that might come through.
Potentially, yes, absolutely. So it's something that we desperately need to avoid. This is called intermodulation. And essentially, it's like harmonic interference. So because these are both dealing with frequencies, they interact with each other. And if you're kind of familiar with how harmonics work in a musical setting, everything kind of complements each other. There's some maths that takes place. That's where we get this kind of harmonic interference. Yeah. And we get this third order intermod down here, which is the one that we really want to worry about. And if this was where our main vocal was in my band scenario, when these two transmitters come together, it's potentially going to take that vocal off air because there's so much energy in that. If I had another carrier here, we'd just lose it. We wouldn't
drop out completely.
Absolutely. And that's why we have to pay very close attention to using groups and channels correctly, which I think we're going to talk about in a subsequent video. So definitely come back for that one. Having a coordination with analog systems is extremely important.
So then how does digital compare?
Good question. So it's slightly different. And again, most of our portfolio is digital now, partly because of this exact reason. So I've got a digital transmitter here at the same frequency. And if I flick this on, even though there's no microphone plugged into it, we get a lot of signal, and we get it a very consistent kind of shape. So it's always going to look like this. Even if I'm modulating this with signal, we're always going to have this kind of curve take place here. And that's because even when there's no audio going through, it still has a digital footprint, right? Anyone who's ever worked with big audio files with nothing in them and sees like gigabytes in their computer will know exactly what I mean by that. You know, it still has a digital footprint. And the advantage with this is we can bring a front-end filter into our receiver that's really tight to this because it's not going to move around a huge amount. And that means that the intermodulation problem is much less when it comes to digital systems. So we can stack systems much, much closer together, get more of them in. Other big advantage with digital is because it is zeros and ones from the point that it leaves our transmitter, I can recover near perfect audio at my receiver because we're not picking up any artifacts over the air. We're not having to compress it a ton. We can get really, really good quality audio out of the other end.
The audio quality is going to be a lot higher and just a lot better, a lot clearer.
Nearly perfect, especially again, once you go up the chain of systems towards like QLXD, the audio quality increases dramatically.
So with that in mind, if I'm in a band and I'm looking to buy my first wireless system, how do I know which one to buy in at? Do I go for the entry-level BLX or do I want SLX or QLX?
It's a great question. If you're a small band, you're doing pubs, or you're a solo kind of singer with backing tracks, and the distance between your transmitter and receiver is relatively small, BLX is going to be really good. Price point is great. We kind of buy you into a channel count, if that makes sense. So we have dual receivers.
Yeah.
These devices also have antennas built into them, which is really, really useful. So everything you need is kind of in one box. So I don't know, 5 to 10 channels max for a small kind of band. 10 channels you're going to be pushing, I think, where you'll want to look at other wireless systems.
Yeah.
And they have other advantages. So stepping up to SLXD, for example, or even BLXR for that matter, we can start to introduce kind of remote antennas and other things of that nature, which is going to increase the quality of that wireless system. So I would say if you're looking at playing academy-sized venues with lots of people who are very, very good at absorbing RF, because we're all just big sacks of water, you're going to want to look up the kind of portfolio from BLX to those higher quality systems.
Yeah. So you mentioned there about the antennas. How important are antennas for these wireless systems?
Antennas are probably the most important component because they're like our ears. They're the things that actually listen to the RF. So in these BLX systems, the antennas are internal, which is really good, again, if the distances are quite small. But if you've got a big crowded room of people and your receiver is going to be way, way at the back of the venue, probably going to start to have some problems with that sort of system, and you'll want to look at being able to remote mount antennas. So I've got some examples here to show you if I can just dip into my little box. This is kind of where we start. This is the most common type of antenna that you'll see. This is called a dipole antenna. And essentially this just allows us to bring the antenna out the back of the rack and put it on the front.
Yeah.
Line of sight for antennas beats pretty much everything else. You can have a really awful RF environment and a bad coordination, but as long as your antenna can physically see the transmitter, it's going to beat pretty much everything else.
So you always want to make sure that you can see the antenna.
Absolutely. So if you get to a point where you've got this on your rack and it still can't see the transmitter, you're going to want to start thinking about remote antennas. So the upgrade from this would be something like this. Okay. This is an omnidirectional remote antenna. It's designed to sit on a Shure mic clip like that. You put that on a mic stand, get it high up above the crowd as much as possible to a point where it can see the stage and you are in a good place. Important bit of information about that is the fact that it's omnidirectional. It's not a true omni. We've actually got a dead spot here and here, so it's like a donut shape. So if you take nothing else away from this video, don't point your omnidirectional antenna at your transmitter. It's not going to work. You want it to be side on like this, but it's going to be listening to everything in a circle. So the question that then comes up is, what about all the stuff behind me? You know, if there's nothing there that I want, what do I want to do? Which brings us to the really good upgrade to make, which is a directional antenna. So this works like a cardioid pickup pattern. If you're into your SM58s and things of that nature, very similar. You point it at the thing that you want to pick up and it works really, really well.
Yeah, I see a lot of those at festivals because I assume that obviously when there's bands playing maybe this side and other stages, you don't want, if you're playing on stage, you don't want to hear the other bands.
Absolutely, yeah. All the RF coming in from the back is useless to you if your stage is that way. So that's where these antennas come in really, really handy.
Amazing, Jack. Thank you so much for that. So just to end, what would you say your top tips for wireless systems are?
Okay. Get a good system, you know, from any of the reputable manufacturers, really, ideally Shure for the purpose of this video, but if you buy cheap, you're not going to get something that's very good. Make sure that you get a set of antennas so you can get them to see your transmitters. That's the most important thing. Use the groups and channel system if it has one. So BLX doesn't have one. We kind of lock you into 5 frequencies that you can use. The other systems like SLX and QLXD will have groups and channels. Just make sure that you're only using one group and then all the channels within that group, so we avoid this intermodulation thing happening. And don't overthink it as well. People get really, really bothered about this stuff and are like, oh my God, I need to like do a coordination and stuff like that. You just want to get on stage and perform. So the idea with getting a good system and setting it up properly is that you arrive at your show, it comes out of the rack and it just works.
Yeah.
So if you find yourself thinking about it too much, take a breath, phone Gear4music, phone Shure, we will help you get to where you need to be.
Amazing, thank you. So yeah, if you have any extra questions, make sure that you leave them in the comments down below and we'll be sure to get back to you. And finally, just make sure that you like, comment and subscribe and we'll see you later. Bye.